.NET Aspire and AI with Chris Ayers.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you deliver quality and run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that the .NET ecosystem has to offer. The podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a full-service software architecture and engineering firm that serves companies using .NET and the entire Microsoft ecosystem. We build mission-critical software and rescue failing projects, empowering software delivery with a proven approach. Quick announcement. I'm excited to announce that my latest book is now fully released. The book is about software leadership. It's called The 5 Pillars, Leadership for Effective Custom Software. And it's for anyone attempting to make a custom software team highly effective. So if you want your team to deliver world-class results, this book may be for you. And teams are also doing book studies and discussions around it. There's a book study guide, and you can find it on Audible, paperback, hardcover, Kindle. If you, dear listener, would like a complimentary electronic copy of the book, then just send me an email, and I'll be happy to get it to you. And also, for those of you who are in a lead architect or software executive role, you might be interested to join our monthly forums. These are interactive conversations, and I love facilitating those. And we have team leads and architects in a dedicated forum. And then we have managers and executives who oversee software groups in a forum so that you can kind of hone in and have some professional development for your role. So you can sign up for those on clearmeasure.com. My guest today on the show is Chris Ayers. Chris Ayers is a senior site reliability engineer at Microsoft's AzRel Risk SRE team, drawing on years of experience in cloud architecture, software development, and DevOps practices. He's passionate about continuous improvement, driving reliability, and sharing industry best practices. And outside of work, Chris is a devoted father, technology enthusiast, and avid gamer. You can connect with him online to explore insights into cloud operations, agile methodologies, and more. And he also organizes the DevOpsDays in Tampa Bay, Florida. Chris, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, thank you. Yeah, it seemed like you struggled a little bit over there. Technology enthusiast. That's just code for I have ADHD, lots of interests, lots of electronics, and I just kind of go where my mind takes me, and I like to dabble in a little bit of everything.
Fantastic. So before we get started, I always like to kind of ask the guests to share a little bit. And you've done so much public speaking and you've done a lot of things. But if you were to back up in your career, are there any formative moments that kind of steered you in what you've ended up making a career out of site reliability engineering?
So I started programming in second grade, and I was doing like 5 or 6 languages by high school. And I got into like Linux and Unix in like the 95. So right around Linux started. And so like technology has been my lifeblood. Like right around the time I graduated, like late 90s, I started at a network company. And so learned networking very early, and we were going to build a custom firewall. So this was like back when Firebox and some of those small Linux appliances that were also firewalls became a thing. Like I dived into that. And so I really started to develop this mindset and this passion for, I'm just going to learn it. Like, there's a lot of people I've worked with in my career, and they're like, I'm an X developer, I'm a this developer. Like, they just stay in their lane, and they don't want to listen or learn anything from somebody that doesn't identify as the same language or whatever. Like, I'm a .NET dev. All I do is .NET, or I'm a Java dev.
Yeah.
So, Win32. I guess I'll learn Win32 programming. Oh, I got to do some command line stuff in Linux. I guess I'll go do some command line stuff in Linux. Like, being open to trying something new and learning, and just like going into an area of being uncomfortable and learning something new and adopting it, I think was a very big inflection point for me. later in my career, when I became a consultant, I was encouraged at the time. So the way a lot of consultancies work is if you're an employee of a consultancy, they want you to get certifications, because if they have so many certifications, they're like a gold or silver partner, at least in the Microsoft ecosystem. The other thing they try to encourage you to do is go to local meetups, because that is a way to promote their business and hire and show expertise. But I found community.
Mm-hmm.
And so I joined the community like 15, 20 years ago at this point, going to meetups, local code camps, going to like regional conferences. Like 4 or 5 years ago, I started doing international conferences. I started organizing, like I do mentorships, like I engage with people in school and out of school, like trying to help them on their career and give back. I think that network of people not only helps you in your career, like as you switch jobs, like there's times I've gotten a job in 4 days, uh, because I knew people and could, like, they knew my work from the community and from other places. It can build connections so you can help others when they are on hard times. It also can foster like company relationships. So like if you know someone looking for a service or good quality work, like you can refer people, and that's it's a good thing that we all support each other.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
The other thing I used the speaking for is I was a manager for a time. I had a team of 15. I ran an Azure practice for a major global systems integrator, and I was selling and being a manager. And so to stay technically relevant and to scratch that technical itch in my brain, I would write technical talks and go deliver them around the world. So it serves a lot of purposes.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had the privilege of sitting at a table at the That conference in Round Rock and chatting about tech. That was fun.
Yeah.
You came into Austin area.
Yeah, Austin's great. I've been there a couple times for a couple of different conferences. There was Longhorn PHP. I think Afrotech was there one time. Like, it's a good city. I enjoy it a lot.
Awesome. Well, I want to ask you about a talk you gave in the fall, aspiring.net with Azure OpenAI. And by the way, we could talk forever because you give so many talks. You speak at so many different conferences.
Again, ADHD and interests. So I really started, like, I've done talks on like IoT devices and Raspberry Pi. I did a lot of coding because I've been coding my whole life. So I would talk about dependency injection and unit testing and techniques for people that are trying to be better at software architecture and like actual coding techniques. I've talked about like VS Code, Visual Studio, like leveraging our tools and making better use of our tools. And then when I joined Microsoft or was focusing on Azure, I really started shifting to like cloud architecture, and I started doing DevOps. So it's like, I'm going to talk about ARM and Bicep and Azure DevOps and infrastructure as code and cloud architecture. And then I also do security. So I've spoken at security conferences and B-sides. So let's secure our infrastructure. Let's secure our code. Let's secure our architecture.
Yeah.
Like, to me, DevOps is that sweet spot because it lets me go wherever I want to go. Because DevOps is a cross-cutting concern. It touches everything.
Yeah.
And the same applies to SRE. SRE is a relatively newer role for me. The team I was on at Microsoft got disbanded and we got moved around. So I was always very customer-facing and helping customers build solutions. Now I'm making Azure better. Like, I'm actually analyzing and working with Microsoft first-party services that build and support Azure. And I'm helping to improve the reliability of Azure itself. So just trying to make quality and security better on Azure. So it's a really cool and exciting opportunity. And it's a scale I haven't dealt with. Like, I've dealt with large multinational like corporations, but now I'm dealing with the platform they run on all at the same time. So it's a different set of distributed computing problems.
Sure. Well, one of the interesting things that with Aspire, with this, hopefully this next release, is the integration with Azure and to actually have a structure of an application where the best practices of how it should run in Azure properly are kind of suggested by the way the Visual Studio solution is put together.
Yeah.
And now that's coming, that's very young, but from your side, when you look at what's possible, what do you think the aspirations of that are going to be?
So I love Aspire. I was following Aspire before it went GA with .NET 8. So I was actually at Build where they announced Aspire's GA, and I was actually at the booth helping support it. So I'm very familiar with a lot of the .NET team. It's such a phenomenal piece of technology, and I'll talk about that more in a sec. Because they've improved it with 9, and they've made a lot of fixes. The other piece that works with Aspire a lot is the AZD, the Azure Developer CLI. So if you haven't played with that, if you've ever used some of the samples like the Azure OpenAI search demo and some of the other demos we have out there, the Azure Developer CLI is a great way to quickly get your application up and running in Azure. So if you have a template that's out there, you can clone it and do AZD up, and it'll have you log into Azure, and then boom, it'll build the infrastructure and then deploy the code. And you can say, go build me a pipeline, and it'll build you a pipeline in GitHub or ADF. If you have code that you've never run in Azure, you can do AZD init, and it can scan your code and say, hey, this looks like it could run in Azure Container Apps or a function. Let me build you some infrastructure, and then I can deploy your stuff out there with Key Vault and monitoring and stuff. So Aspire leverages that, but Aspire goes beyond that. So Aspire is, they call it a stack. They don't really call it a framework. It's a set of opinion choices and defaults. So .NET has been able to do all the things Aspire does. But you had to kind of like, here's this whole big tool chest. Let me go pick the individual ones, and I know I need to do this.
Yeah.
Aspire simplifies and integrates all of it. So I do a talk on containers with .NET. A lot of times people will do containers. And if you want to have a database container, a backend container, and a front-end container, you got to sit there, maybe open 3 or 4 terminal windows, Docker run this, Docker run that. What's the port? Copy, paste, update my config file. You got to do all these hoops to kind of get stuff started and running and integrated and talking together. And then you have to like plug in your IP address and your port. One thing Aspire tries to do is do some orchestration. So they had an app host project to orchestrate things. And maybe I don't want to do YAML. Maybe I don't want to do all this config stuff. Maybe I want to write C# and say, I would like a Redis. I would like a Postgres. And I would like my backend API. And then that API needs a reference to Redis. And I can just add one line of code. And the Aspire, they call them integrations. So there's a hosting integration, and that hosting integration will say, oh, you're using Redis. I should go get a container and spin up Redis, and then I should get the port out or the connection string out. And then when you plug it into your backend API, in that you might go, I need the Aspire client package. And it goes, hey, I know how to talk to Redis. And like Redis is open source, but the client package wraps it with all those defaults that we talked about. I want HTTPS. I want SSL certs. I want retry. I want OpenTelemetry so that I can have tracing and metrics and logging across the board. I want auto discovery. So I can just say in my API, go talk to Redis, and it'll figure out what port it's running on, what IP it's running on. And under the hood, it's just using the .NET configuration system. It's using like retry type policies. It's using just configuration variables, but it's in a convention that wires everything up for you really easily. The talks I've been doing lately with OpenAI and AI and Aspire take some of those improvements and combine them with some of the newest improvements they've been making in .NET, which is the AI extensions. So if you ever did AI coding, a lot of times you'd have to make your own libraries or classes for a HTTP request to a model and a response, or you'd have to use the OpenAI libraries and be tied to OpenAI. But what if you're on your laptop on a plane and you want to do some AI coding and you use something like Olama, which is a super popular tool, and I want to use the Llama 3 model or the 5.3.5 or 5.4 model that just came out, or something like that. Do I now need 4 or 5 different libraries all over the place to work with my code? Well, in my code base out there, which I think you're going to share the link to, build with Aspire.
Yeah.
Like in my app host, you can tell it in a config, do I want to do local AI or Azure AI? And it can go Aspire with Visual Studio. You can actually log into the portal, or you can tell it the Azure account you want to use. And when you spin up an Aspire project, it can go create a resource group. It can go create an Azure OpenAI instance. It can take that connection string and plug it in your app. So locally, that can be working, but it'll spin up Azure resources, or it'll spin up local Docker images. Like I can choose, or I can use an existing one. But yeah, it's just awesome. And with those AI extensions, I just code, I need a chat client, go do a completion. And I don't care what service is it. I don't care if it's Olama. I don't care if it's Azure OpenAI. I don't care what model it is. Those AI extensions kind of abstract that away. And we've got so many tools for that. We can abstract the infrastructure implementation with stuff like Dapper. We can abstract the actual orchestration of infrastructure with Aspire. There's other projects that are like working, that are coming down the pipeline, like Radius and other things that, like, just as a developer today, being able to like quickly in like 3 or 4 lines of code, add a new component, have it spin up and be able to just go off to the races. That speed and support I haven't seen before. Like it's just phenomenal.
Nice. You did mention your build with Aspire GitHub repository. We'll include that in the show notes, github.com/codebytes/build with Aspire with dashes.
Yeah. And all my slides are there. So that was something I moved to a couple of years ago. I got frustrated with presentations in PowerPoint and OneNote and stuff, or OneDrive. And if I had to swap laptops because it wouldn't present, it was a problem. So pretty much all my code lives in GitHub. My slides live in GitHub. I have code spaces for them. I actually had that happen to me in Copenhagen. My Surface wouldn't project because they had like a thing in the way to like intercept it and reproject it. It just wouldn't connect. So I had to borrow a Danish laptop with a funky keyboard, and I had to have someone come type the slash, and I had to copy it and paste it. And so I did my whole talk on a borrowed laptop in a browser, like through code spaces and the slides, everything.
Nice.
It's awesome stuff. Like we're in an age where like we're kind of back to thin clients in a way.
Terminals, yeah.
But we have so much power locally. But like with containers and with stuff like Aspire, we can spin up all of the dependencies and all of our build tools in just a browser, and then .NET Run.
So I want to ask you about
crazy
the AI side of it. So your sample, it uses app host to configure Olama, but also the dependency to Azure OpenAI. And are we, in your opinion, are we finally to the point where we can treat these GPT models kind of as a commodity, where you just choose the model, but the prompts are kind of now part of our business logic?
So the prompts are definitely a thing. Prompt engineering is 100% a thing. Like how you craft your prompt, the inputs you're giving it, the examples, few shot, one shot, the outputs you're doing is definitely a core part of your business logic. I think the evolution is to agentic development behavior. And what I mean is instead of one big model, we feed it tons of data and we give it one big prompt, we're going to have 4, 5, 10 little prompts. They're super laser focused that do small chunks of work. And then a planner is going to assemble that and do some final sort of work. So agentic solutions, autogen.
You said
things like that.
Agenic with an A?
Agentic, as in agents, like
okay.
AGE. Yeah.
Understood.
So multi-agent chatbots, or it used to be like we're going to do functions, like OpenAI functions, or methods, like assistance API. Like we're going to have lots of little assistants, but we in Azure, I think they're calling it Azure OpenAI Agents service. But agents, agentic, Like that's kind of the evolution. Another thing I'll point out is OpenAI is an amazing model. Like GPT 4.0, GPT 1.0, those are incredible models. I'm sure that the next one's on the way. But those are large language models.
Yeah,
like
very
Llama.
large.
There are definitely use cases for small language models. I do a lot in Azure, and we have the AI Studio, and that actually has a big marketplace. You can actually see all of the models that you might find out on Hugging Face. So Hugging Face is an open source place where people can train models and put them up there. You can use them in Olama. You can pull them down, run them in a Docker. There's even KAITO, KAITO. So Kubernetes AI, like integration, like it's a thing for spinning up AI models on Kubernetes and orchestrator. Like it's kind of interesting. But like there's different use cases. Like I think as you start making a chatbot, great. Now, how do we evaluate?
Mm-hmm.
Is it the same prompt on multiple models? Can we use a small language model like designed for legalese or designed for a different language or designed for, we give it the prompt and the data, we use that to make a more efficient prompt that we then send to the big model? Like there's all sorts of interesting use cases as you start making these. And you have to be responsible in all of your uses. Like most of the samples are, here's weather, here's a little basic chatbot, but like I would highly recommend evaluating your use case before you go too far down.
Well, just a quick aside, and depending on when the listeners are listening to this, the timing may be off, but I was listening to Larry Ellison and a few other tech giants talk with President Trump about this huge AI investment for medical, and he was describing the use case about using these models in a blood test to detect and help to diagnose something that may be going on with that blood sample. And I'm just thinking, okay, software architecture wise, what's the structure that would make those kinds of use cases possible?
I think this is a little bit of a lack of capability, understanding of the capabilities of things, because this is a case where I think in mainstream news and a lot of like social media sites, people are like, "Ooh, AI could do all this stuff." As someone who's worked with AI a bunch, like some of the coding things it can do are interesting.
Yeah.
But they're all trained on code that's most likely working. And so people forget ML, machine learning, the thing we've been doing for decades, which is we want a deterministic answer.
Right.
I'm going to train this model very, 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 very heavily on structured training data, and we're going to refine it and train it until it starts getting to a point where we can give it unknown data and it can give us a prediction, classification, or a regression, or it shows us like where things will end up in the future, like monetary systems or heat charts or whatever. LLMs are really, really, really good at generative AI, so summarizing and glorified autocompletes. So like just subbing A for B, I don't think is gonna, we diagnosed cancer. Like they've had machine learning systems and they've had systems that have tried to help radiologists detect X-ray stuff, and it wasn't as good for many, many years. Like it's caused like they've missed things or they misdiagnosed it. Like there always needs to be a human in the loop. When we talk about responsible AI, we really talk about at Microsoft, at least the principles where you need to have some transparency and accountability. Like, why did it say these things? What were the data input to it? Is it secure? And
cite your sources.
But yeah, like we need to know what happened. Show your work.
Yeah.
Like, but also we have sensitive use cases. Are we doing stuff with like law enforcement where someone's life or freedom is on the line? Are we doing stuff with jobs or banks or health or any of this long line of things where bias in humans can make its way into bias in systems? So we try to be very aware of that. So I did hear about Stargate. So the collaboration between OpenAI and Oracle and
SoftBank.
SoftBank. And like I heard about that, and I have heard that they're wanting to increase usages in healthcare use case scenarios. I think people sometimes give it more credit.
Well, I can understand. I'm just thinking architecture wise, and it's one thing to say, you know what, it looks like this technology mix should be able to do this task, but then we have to go and say, okay, what's ready now and what still needs to be built? And it sounds like that there's for some use cases, there still may need to be these specialized models that have been trained with tons of blood samples, the actual diagnosis, and in order to be able to ask you those questions.
You and I might have different readings in our blood samples.
Yeah.
What if you have a condition where your whole body is flipped? What if you have some genetic markers where your blood pressure is elevated or lowered, or your body processes salt differently? You have different lipid mix. There's so many countless variables in place.
Right.
Like, I don't think just here's a picture and here's a printout of like a bunch of blood samples is going to give you a holistic picture. A lot of, and yes, I think a lot of medicine is both an art and a science in some cases, like, because things fall through the cracks and people make guesses.
Yeah.
Like the same thing could happen.
And
I just don't think it's the silver bullet.
And nothing is. But I'm kind of channeling the listeners that they're developing really cool .NET applications, and everyone's wondering, okay, well, what can I use it for now?
It won't wash your dishes and fold your clothes.
Yeah. And I'm glad that there's massive investments into, hey, could we, because I mean AI is just more like, technology.
I'll tell you what I use it for. Like, I use the Copilot in Teams. Like, if I've missed a meeting, give me a summary of it. I know it's not accurate, but it might give me the themes, or give me the action items of this.
Yeah.
If I don't want to spend hours listening to every meeting and I want to spend 30 minutes reading a couple summaries, and then I can go back and watch the ones I want, that lets me target my attention better, because I'm like reading summaries. If I don't feel like crafting this big, long, wordy email, but I know kind of what I want to say, I can list the bullet points I want to cover and ask it to autocomplete it for me and then go back and read it. See, not everyone goes back and reads it. Like that's, as a conference organizer and as a speaker, when you see there are speakers that will use AI generated summaries and they don't refine them, and you can
they're terrible.
See it. They're terrible.
Yes.
Like, there's word choices, like how many that say delve. We're gonna delve with a colon, and then we're gonna do this and delve. Like there's word choices, there's phrasing.
Yep.
It just, like, it can, as humans, like, sometimes looking at blank page is hard. But if we can put 3 bullets down, have it autocomplete, and then edit that, like, we know what we want to say. It's just wordsmithing it. But those things save me time.
Right.
Like, I use Copilot in my code. I don't use it for a lot of basic things I can just do quickly with the editor, but sometimes there's some new features like edit with Copilot, or I can hit like 3 or 4 files and I'm like, extract this into a class, move it over here, and update the usages in all the places. And it'll be, okay, 1 sec. And it'll like update all 3 files and make a new file. And like, that actually saved me like 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And then I can write the test or, validate it. So like, I know it's going to get better. I know it's going to do things. And I know people are going to keep pushing the boundaries. I always caveat everything I build with AI and everything that uses AI models. It's not perfect. It's also not deterministic. Like, the answer you get this time might be different than the answer next time.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like super repeatable input in, input out. Like, it's probabilistic out, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
so
want to ask on the Azure side and pulling it back from the AI side, but go back to Azure and .NET Aspire. Your perspective, you're coming from the Azure side, and so one of the interesting things that I see with Aspire is it recommending or having some type of opinion about the structure of the Azure resources that should be created given what I've put in the app host and in the Visual Studio solution. And one of the big challenges, among many, is okay. I can run something in Azure Container Apps or App Service and Azure SQL and whatnot, but each of those has the IP addresses. What is the best way for, I don't know, crafting the networking and kind of making my subnet that's insulated to the outside and the other things around it?
So it is a opinion around development. That's the main thing to keep in mind. I think like you can use it to spin up resources, like I've said, but when you go into a production environment, like one of the things you can do is you can also pass in that configuration. So if you're in an organization, or if you're trying to lock things down with managed identities, private endpoints, all that stuff, you can craft that. Like you can use AZD to actually eject out bicep to give you the raw bicep from your Aspire application. You can then tweak it, customize it, make it more secure. And like a lot of times you're not going to redeploy your prod environment every time. Once prod's there, you're going to leave it. You might not deploy it every time.
Yeah.
So you can get those config values and pass them into Aspire. And because it's based on the .NET config system, what that means is environment variables. So like as you spin up your container app, as you spin up Kubernetes or app hosts, or app services, you can just put the endpoints in as connection, as environment variables into those. You can use managed identities and not even include any keys or anything like that. And it'll just use the endpoint. It'll use the resource. And so you can make your environment however you want, and Aspire will leverage that. It just, in your code, you won't have to change anything. You're going to call it database, you're going to call it backend, and all the config values will just map. And it's actually very clearly defined nowadays in the Aspire dashboard. Like when you click on it, you'll see like what the variables are. And OpenTelemetry. So you get the logging and the tracing. And that's also very easy to override. There's great documentation on pointing it at like an OpenTelemetry host, or using something like Azure Monitor or App Insights. Like that's all well documented. The dashboard is incredible, but it is a ring buffer, so it won't persist your logs forever. So you can use it, but if you want logs for a long period of time, you might want to use a production logging service or source. Like I said, Azure Monitor, Honeycomb, something.
And do you have a favorite destination for all your logs?
I have a lot of friends in a lot of different companies. Honeycomb is incredible. I usually use Azure Monitor because it fully ingests OpenTelemetry. And there's actually some great documentation. So I'm doing more Python apps now a little bit as well. And there's a great blog on how to pull OpenTelemetry into your Python and point it at your Aspire dashboard. So you Docker run your Aspire dashboard, and then you run your Python, and it just sends all your logs straight to that. Like it is an incredible development tool. Like the Aspire dashboard is a listener for OpenTelemetry. I use it on everything. It is just, it's like one more tool in my toolbox that I use constantly. And I've defaulted everywhere to OpenTelemetry. App Insights is moving to OpenTelemetry. Like they already use it for Java and Python. .NET supports OpenTelemetry. Everything supports OpenTelemetry. That's the future. That's the standard. Do that.
Nice. And before we end, just all the listeners are kind of setting up their workstations for playing around with the AI models and whatnot. This is a common question. So as someone who's done it before, with Olama running it locally, given that even the Microsoft, like the Surface laptop,
I have one. Right, the new Copilot ones with ARM64. Yeah, Olama runs great right on the CPU.
So with the flag, use all GPUs, the Surface laptop also has an NVIDIA GPU, and then it has the Intel one baked in. And so how do you set it up to force it to use your NVIDIA GPU, which will run it faster?
So on my desktop at home has an NVIDIA. And so I tell it with minus use GPUs, and it runs on my GPUs locally. My Surface Copilot laptop. So I got one of the new ARM64 Snapdragons. It does not have NVIDIA. It has a Snapdragon GPU and a Snapdragon CPU. they worked with Olama to make it work on the CPU. So for that, I just comment out the lines that say use GPUs. Like if you just comment that line out, it just runs right on your CPU, just fine. And on Olama, on the Snapdragon, runs perfectly fine. On an Intel i7, like it'll do like the words will show up.
Just a little bit slower
in a reasonable amount of time. On the NVIDIA, I don't even have a 4000 series. I have a 3080, and on my NVIDIA,
it's fast.
So it's much faster. But I've run Olama on my laptop on a plane and chatted with it, and it works fine. And it's about it's a little bit faster than my reading speed. And I read pretty fast, so it was like
which that right there tells me, and I've had similar experiences. That right there tells me for use cases is where the scale is not high, it should be perfectly reasonable to just locally run Olama, even in production, to do very simple things where the response of a prompt is expected to be small and not large, just maybe some pattern recognition before having to reach for Azure, OpenAI, and of course pay the increased fees with that resource.
I always tell people, like, what is your use case and what is your goal? Like, if you're in an enterprise, you're like, oh, I want to use local models and stuff. I'm like, okay, like that's fine. You got to maintain the hardware and the server. You're gonna have backups of that, or you're gonna have multiple of the thing. Like, what's your uptime use case? So now there's an overhead. So now you've got to patch it. Is Olama ready for production use? I don't know. I don't think so. So maybe you're running a Kubernetes cluster over a bunch of hardware with NVIDIA GPUs. So you're probably already sitting at 10 or 15K, maybe 30 for the hardware alone. Put Kubernetes on it. Maybe you use KAITO, the KAITO, to pull down images and service them. You got to maintain that so you can have endpoints. Like that's a thought. Like you can spin up a model as well and have an endpoint and use that. Like some people are like, oh, I'll just use the API OpenAI. So now there's security concerns. So like if you're running your stuff in Azure and you send it to an Azure OpenAI model, it stays in the Microsoft backbone, doesn't leave. So you can, secure it. There's content filtering. There's also all sorts of stuff around security. So if people try to jailbreak the model, if people try to do something nefarious, there are scanning and protections in place there already to look at it. And you can do rate limiting and all the other fun stuff. And you can do chargeback models and billback models by getting the request coming in and looking at the different APIs doing it. You might have to build that on your own locally, and you wouldn't get some of that protection. But let's say you use the API in OpenAI. Wherever you are, it's going to leave your cloud and traverse the public internet to get to the OpenAI APIs.
Right.
Do you want your stuff traversing that? Like are you okay with that? Like that's a question. Like you can't just blanket say you have to do it this way. Everybody has a different level of risk. Everyone has a different level of security, a different level of architecture. So, I do a lot of talks on resiliency and resiliency by design and failure mode analysis.
Yeah.
So what type of failures are you trying to survive? If it's 2 or 3 boxes running in your data center or under your desk, your uptime might be lower than if you're using one in the cloud. And then there's different architectures for that. Maybe you have 2, one in east, one in west with a balancer, and you only pay for what you use. Like, depending upon what you use, there is going to be a break-even point, and then a point where you like, is it required for operation? Yeah. Like, are we having this chatbot running, and if we don't have it, we're going to have to hire more people. And again, that's part of the problems we have with people putting AI on everything. Like, it can do a worse job, and it can hurt people not having a job. At the same time.
Well, so many people are just trying to figure out what they could use it for,
and some people are trying to figure out how they can replace people with it. That's just in the back of my head. I think it's a tool to make us better, not a tool to replace us. Like that's how I use it.
Right. Exactly. Well, we could go on for a long time to come. Thank you so much for coming on the Azure and DevOps podcast and sharing with us about Aspire and Azure and AI. This is fascinating. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thanks for scratching my ADHD brain. Like I said, I like talking about different topics and how they all interconnect. Nothing we do anymore is in isolation, really. It always touches some other bit of technology that's somebody's passion project.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you for having me
here. Oh, my pleasure. And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.